Forward, a limited series of conversations with diverse documentary filmmakers about our future during the crises of 2020. I'm your host, Anjanette Levert, purveyor of documentaries. I am a filmmaker, professor, curator, programmer, and coach in the documentary sphere. Future Forward has been made possible by Spelman College's Carnegie Rockefeller Divisional Priority Award, where I'm a lecturer in our recently created documentary film program. This series was inspired by the author Arundhati Roy. She wrote an article called "The Pandemic is a Portal: Early in the Global Coronavirus Crisis." It's beautiful and haunting close to the article really stayed with me. The essence of it is this: these crises are an opportunity to break from the past and reimagine our world. I have been meditating on this both personally and professionally during these past months. Because I have had these conversations before, I wanted to record the thoughts of some of the best and the brightest creators in our industry about reimagining our work docs. Emily Cohen Ibañez is a Colombian-American filmmaker and anthropologist. She earned her doctorate at New York University in anthropology in 2011. She is a director, producer, cinematographer and writer, and the owner of Reversa Films. She specializes in telling stories about the complex relationship between the United States and Latin America. Her latest project is Fruits of Labor, where she tells the story of a migrant teenage worker with aspirations for a different life. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Emily. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you, Anjanette, for having me. This is really wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you because we've had conversations over the years about these same kinds of things. And so you were just one of the people that I immediately thought of to be a part of this. So thank you again. So listen, right off the bat, the name of your production company is Reversa. So what do you envision reversing?
Yeah, so the idea behind that name was really thinking about the counter narrative, sort of flipping the narrative. So we have sort of these master narratives about people in the world, whether they're Latinos or, different folks in the world. And I wanted to make films that showed what is not normally seen, or providing a different approach to seeing, especially, let's say, Latinos on screen, right? Reversing some of the kind of more stereotypical kind of images, and giving sort of a fuller, complex picture. And then as far as wanting to reverse just in general, I see our documentary film industry, I love it. I love the people in it, but I also see it as a broken system, especially here in the United States. So some of the things that I want to do in sort of reversing, breaking and rebuilding is really, around, for example, funding. In the US, it's a very fragmented system. So to be an independent, we're pulling from grants and sort of a patchwork of funding, and normally cannot, raise enough funds to really make our films, and we're making it on half or a quarter of the budget. And so, we were talking earlier, Anjanette, about resilience. Why do we have to be so resilient, right? And I loved that question you posed, because it becomes a marathon. And there's really, and what that marathon does is it excludes people. So there's always going to be a percentage of people who are going to be able to make films without any money or very little, or start their films. I started this film on crowdfunding and literally was like passing out flyers on the sidewalk, getting taquerias involved. I mean, it was nuts just to raise the first 15K to make a short, that then became the feature film. And that I considered even a privileged position, right? That I could even take the time to do that, as hard as that was. And so what we do, and we eliminate, when we create this marathon and this fragmented system, is so many voices, like talented, you know, unique voices that we need to have in documentary to really truly make it what people are calling the golden age. It's not just about slick productions, but it's about storytelling. It's about diverse forms and diverse voices, because that kind of representation, it's something that we need as a society. You know, we're all members of a larger society, and it's a social contract. And most of us are in agreement that we want a democratic society. And so what does that mean? How do we then realize that dream or that ideal? And the ways to move forward on that within the documentary film industry is to widen by not eliminating voices based on, you know, the commodification of our form, where budgets are getting higher and higher and higher, and less people are able to really become a part of the storytelling. And so, you know, it becomes not a meritocracy necessarily, as we know. This sort of how our system works. And there are models out there. There are models in Europe. There are models in Australia. There are models pretty much in many places, even parts of the developing world, that have figured out how to make a documentary system that is more sustainable. We like to use the word sustainable, but what does that actually mean? And it comes down to money. It comes down to centralizing, you know, funding, so that it's not like, you know, the documentary filmmaker is scrambling to get patches of money to make these really high production value films. So I think that's a huge part of how do we reverse that and create, because there are other models. How do we reimagine and then implement these things? So we can have the society we want, we can have the films that we want in the world. You know, we can do this. This is all doable, and that's what's so hopeful, is it's totally doable. And we have enough people in an industry to get together and collectively fight for this.
Right. So you said a lot. You said a lot. I was taking notes. I was like, oh, that's a good point. So the first one I want to go back to is, like, you jumped right in there on, you know, funding is like usually like the big thing that we're always talking about. Like everyone, like actually the industry just talks about it. And you just talked about how like costs for films are going up. And in many ways, like the expectations of the cost of your film also goes up. You know, I'm working with a filmmaker. We were very privileged to be a part of the Southern Producers Lab. Shout out to New Orleans Film Festival. Gotta give them props. And so one of the things is that we're meeting with different industry leaders, and someone that I met with looked at our budget and was like, is that really the cost? And I was like, it doesn't have to be. It could be higher by 10,000 maybe. She said, that will put you in the ballpark. So like on one hand, she was very right in telling us like, actually, your prices are too low. So part of that is regionally where we are. You know, we're in the Deep South, in Georgia specifically. And so some of those costs are lower. But then also she's like, but you're also underestimating that cost is still underestimated based on like who you're using and that sort of thing. And then there's also this kind of comparison between, you know, my whole thing is that as a part of the South, or as a part of like people who are not in LA and New York, everyone is compared to those two places, particularly New York, you know, I think because there's so, you know, you can't walk down the street in Manhattan or Brooklyn at this point, and about to be the Bronx and Queens, without hitting a filmmaker, you know. And then every filmmaker, of course, makes documentaries, you know, because it's the hip thing to do these days. So you talked about there's different models that do work. And so what model would you like to see us adopt here?
I think that it's a continual discussion, right? I don't have all the answers, but I do I'm part of a group called the Independent Documentary Directors Group. And right now we're discussing that and doing some research on that. So, one of the things, for example, Canada has a national film board, right? And when people get greenlit, they're getting greenlit for their entire budgets. And so they're not having to constantly be on the treadmill of raising the money and not knowing what's going to happen from month to month.
Mm-hmm.
And, we also, when we think about our budgets, why then it seems so inflated? Do we put these big budgets and then we can make it for half the price? That's on our labor, on our backs. And so it's like when you're making films on minimum wage, when you really calculate the hours you're putting in or less, then that's problematic. And then, we're having to juggle so many different freelance jobs to try to make it work. And then on top of that, many of us have to have partners who are providing health insurance. So then there's even just larger societal things. For example, if freelance, yes, independent documentary filmmakers have been freelancers for a long time. If you want to create a society that's increasingly dependent on freelance labor, you have to have national health care. You just have to do it. Because you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to create more instability in the economy, you got to put something there. It's like, and mind you, you might say, well, yeah, it was your choice. Sure, certainly it was to be a documentary filmmaker, but somebody's making money because the Netflixes, the Amazons, all these folks, this is a big industry and somebody's making money. We need to also look at that distribution of money and the people who are making the work. You can't have an industry if you don't have the people making the work.
So from what you're saying is that these higher budgets are actually a good thing, because when you really think about it, you don't get paid for like every hour you do. You get paid to have to accomplish that one thing, right? Like sound is one thing, but you budget, which seems like a lot of money, $30,000. But if the person has to work extra hours to make a deadline, or something goes wrong, things need to be redone, then they're down to, because I definitely have recalled, I was like, oh wow, I did this one, I've done many jobs where I was like, when I got paid, I was like, this is paltry. It seemed like a lot of money when I signed up, and what it was supposed to be, I'm like, oh yeah, I can get that done in like a week. 5-6 weeks later, I'm like, oh wow, I literally got paid less, a quarter of minimum wage. I'm down to $3 an hour based on what it took to bring that project over the finish line. So on one hand, you could say, well, you underestimated. So then there is this whole idea of actually we need to, maybe there's a new calling that we also need to understand, that we actually need to earn all the money that it actually takes to live, not just what you can get by on, because healthcare is $200-250 or more, a month. That's for an individual. And if you're having a family, that's a whole other deal. It's also interesting that as you were speaking, I was thinking about wow, several of the things that you talked about have been things that I've just understood, hey, to be a part of this industry, these are some of the things that you need to put in place. You need to figure out a way where you're going to get healthcare, or you can get cheap healthcare. So that's either working someplace part-time, full-time, and then doing your work on the side. That for many filmmakers, it is having a partner who has access to, good healthcare, so they have a 9-to-5 kind of situation. Or one of the things that I figured out very early on is a lot of producers, because we do tend to be female in this industry at least, are married to very wealthy men, or they're quietly trust fund babies, right? So they don't actually even worry about, like, so they can work for the $3.50 an hour, right? Because it's not, their lifestyle is not attached to how much money they make, right? So I found that really interesting, that like, oh, wait, so right there's a place that we can start to break that open, these assumptions about what it takes to be a part of this industry. So then, like, how can we reimagine that? And already you just came up with, hey, we need universal health care. That actually would allow so many more people to actually become, full-time filmmakers, or even just give it a try to see if they actually like it, see if they actually want to do it, right? Because there's probably people standing on the sidelines who would want to, but they're just like, I can't do it. I can't do it.
Absolutely. I did it a little later in life because of that, you know what I mean? Because of that. So I think that, and the other thing I want to bring up is age. There's ageism in our industry. And I think the reason that people are so obsessed with youth, I love youth. I love young people. But, there's some wisdom that comes with age. And why I think that ageism exists in our industry is because when people are in their 20s, they can do that hustle a little more easily. And as you get older, you have healthcare needs, you have families, you have all these other things, desires of ways to live in your life. And so it's like not convenient, because then you actually have to pay people a living wage.
Yeah.
And so that, I just, all these, there's awards that really valorize being young. And I don't think that serves us. I actually don't think that serves us. And I think that, I know someone who graduated from art school at age 60. I want to see her work. Why? Because she's got a different perspective. She's lived a whole life.
I agree. So maybe that's one of the places that we can really start to reimagine, is that, like, you come to this, if we actually allow people, or make it an understanding that you're going to earn a living wage, then that allows for younger people to also be able to start their families earlier. Most filmmakers in general, don't start their families until late, unless something happened, you find love early, but I must say that for myself, I really, my whole idea was I wanted my career first, and then I could, kind of like kick back for a little bit, and then start looking for a partner. Okay, hey, if you know anyone, go ahead and send them my way. I'm still looking. I'm on the market. That is real talk. All you listeners out there, if you think you have someone for me, you know how to reach me. You know how to reach me. I'm on all the social.
You're an excellent catch. So honestly, yes. So
I did not pay her to say that, right?
No, not at all.
So, and I think definitely about the ageism was like, so then, because I was recently listening to Mark Duplass, so also shout out to Seed and Spark. They have been doing these kinds of conversations since like May or something like that. But he was also saying, hey, emerging filmmakers. And then he kept saying, he realized that he kept thinking of emerging filmmakers as young people. And then he was like, but wait, I'm starting to meet, emerging filmmakers who are in their 50s and 60s because of the circumstances at the time that they came out of school, like completely different circumstances now, right? They chose to have, if they already had their families, they chose a different path. And now that there's way fewer barriers, they're coming back. Like, that's still their desire, that's still their passion. So they're being emerging filmmakers at 50, 60 years old, no different than the woman that you were talking about. And so then we can start to reimagine what does that look like. You actually start your career at 60. I remember there was a couple, and one of the guys worked at Lover. But his degree was in like not art history, but like film history or something like that. And for him, he thought, I'm not going to even start directing until you know, I'm in my 60s. But this was a white man, and I was thought, that's rich. I'm like, well, isn't that, you know, like, not that it's rich, but I'm like, wow, I wouldn't even thought that that's even a possibility, but that's a possibility for you. But now can we also, as diverse filmmakers, also start to take that on? Like, it's never too late. You can always start, right? So that's also something that we can, you know, really start to reimagine. What would it be like to, like when on the Academy Award, they're like, this is her first nomination, you know, with her first film at age 55, you know.
I'd love it.
Right? And then the big thing is like, damn, she's 55. She looks good. Damn, she looks good. She could get it.
I know. Yeah.
And then like, is that her husband? Oh, I could definitely take him. You know? So yes, so thank you for that as another way to reimagine. But you know, you mentioned the Canadian, their national film board, but then I'm wondering, does that still also lead to like only so many people can get their film made?
I think we still are like that, right? So our PBS system, and I love our PBS people, you know, and it's super, my gosh, we need them. And honestly, they're the ones who are supporting any diverse voices, as
thank you. Yes,
small as that is.
Shout out to them.
A super shout out. But wouldn't that be amazing if they had the funds to support more diverse filmmakers? Because right now it is very limited. To get ITBS Open Call is extraordinarily competitive. And not only, and it's not only the competition, but usually wanting to be the last money in. So to even get to that point is a real challenge. And so yeah, I mean, it's like, I think we just need more money. And I think it's possible.
How can we start to reimagine like where that money comes from? Because right now, you know, I have like, there's this thing of like looking outwardly instead of looking inwardly, because to be fair, African Americans, we are like the largest consumers of everything, whatever it is, we buying it, right? And the money doesn't circulate inside our communities. That's a whole thing. That's a whole context. I'm, please understand before you start writing me or whatever, is that like, I get that there's like a historical and systematic things at play that have that happen, right? I get that. And yet and still, it's not like we don't have money. It's not like we won't spend money. So then how can we start to flip it so that the money comes back or the money stays? And so thinking, similarly, like how can we as diverse filmmakers, how can we start to reimagine how the money comes to us or where money comes to us from? We already have these same things. So then can we start to imagine something else?
Yeah. And I think that's great, because thinking internally, it's like, we also, we need to create our own systems, right? And people have started, look at, I'm a Firelight Fellow this year. I love Firelight. Amazing. I'm in Fourth World Indigenous Media Lab this year. Amazing. Yes.
Yes.
So when I find, Brown Girls Doc Mafia.
That's my heart right there.
Yeah. And I mean, that for me, we've created it as a group of diverse filmmakers has been really through our own organizing, right? And what we've done internally, because otherwise the way the system works, it's working just fine for certain folks. And honestly, like, not whatever, but like, yes, there is sort of like the white male filmmaker that has always been supported, right? And it's through creating these other internally our own networks and support systems that are going to understand our story. We were talking earlier about magical realism and this whole divide between mainstream and experimental, right? But if we create our own pipelines, and we are creating our own pipelines, by the way, and very powerfully so, because if you have folks in the power pipeline that are really homogenous, they're going to connect with stories that they understand and know. And then the rest gets sort of marginalized or put in this like experimental camp. And I don't even, I sometimes describe there's elements of experimental in the films that I make or in Fruits of Labor, but honestly, I don't consider myself an experimental filmmaker. I actually want to, like, there's people who are like, I don't care what the audience, what the audience gets or doesn't get. I actually do. I think of like, I want the kids at the high school that are in the film to watch my film and get it, so I don't know, like, in that way I'm a little more of a populist, I guess you could say, but, when we talk about magical realism, for example, that's a part of the literary canon within Latin America, that's a way of storytelling because it mirrors the storytelling. My family's originally from Colombia. Garcia Marquez, most Colombians will tell you, people tell these stories in the small towns. It's a culture of storytelling. You have storytellers on the street. It's a form of recreation on Sundays to go out to the street and listen to storytellers. It's a part, every town they document their own storytelling. It's a cultural form. Storytelling is like my grandparents, the way that you think, oh my God, this is magical realism, but this is just the way that they told stories about their lives. And we'd all sit around and listen to these stories. And so, that's a part of the way that we become storytellers. And we don't, a lot of times we're thinking, oh my God, I got to be like this because, I'm definitely, look, I have a doctorate, I went through I was educated, and oftentimes we look at the European, and I do this myself, European or white filmmakers as like the aspiration, but yet we have our own forms. We have these rich cultural backgrounds we can pull from. And that, and our audiences are there, there's films, there's Black audience, there's Latino audiences, there's, and then also, I think white audiences and everybody is hungry to get different ways of telling stories. It's proven fact. When these films come out, even when industry people are saying, no, that movie's not going to sell, and then it gets out in the world, and it has a huge popularity. I mean, you can look in the Hollywood level, like Black Panther, right? That's like the story. There's a lot at play here. So yeah, I mean, we have with our diversity, we have these rich cultural storytelling forms to pull from. And so let's do that. I mean, you know what I mean? Embrace it, because that's where we're going to shine. That's where we're going to be our best. And that's where people are going to be like, wow, this is another way of seeing the world, right? The idea of the supernatural or the spiritual that just is within mundane life. What a beautiful form for documentary that is often about daily life, right?
Yeah. I love that because, one of the things as a teacher is I teach, like, here are the conventions of documentary film. You need symphonic music, there's the voice of God, talking heads, B-roll that's sort of tangential to what they're talking about, but really not really. Like whenever they say, oh, they're talking about population, we show a crowded street in, in whatever town they're talking about, mostly New York City, because so then that means that it's also, through a certain lens, because you could just do a crowded street in China, that's also population, or India or whatever, even though it's totally out of context or whatever, but you're still talking about like, those sorts of things are like the general, conventions. And then, so now I'm hearing is that, or I have been thinking about, I don't know who coined the word magical realism, but magical realism being actually a, like being a mainstay of documentary film, or a certain genre of documentary film, or for even, if you will, like a device used by certain filmmakers, where it's like, as you said, not experimental, it's just what is. Especially since it was used in 306 Hollywood, they refer to that film as magical realism. And I'm like, I wouldn't have ascribed that to that film, because I think of magical realism as also having, religious and spiritual connotations interwoven in also this, if you will, a leap of faith, like, that didn't really happen, with the leap of faith. Okay, there you go, right? So I think of so that's how I think of magical realism. So I was like a little bit surprised, and I was like, oh, well, if that's what we're doing, okay. I would have thought of it as like, what is it, like stop motion? Most of it seemed like, stop motion, photography. And I was like, this is really cool. And shout out to them. I love the film, so I wrote that down, like, hey, magical realism as a future, like, non-experimental convention of documentary, contributed by diverse filmmakers. Woohoo! You're welcome.
Yeah.
And then also I was thinking about, like, one of the things that you were mentioning is about organizing. Like, you mentioned so many groups organizing, creating pipelines. I mean, certainly, in some way, that's actually what colleges are. To be fair, we take your money and we send you onto this, like, you're there in college. It's a pipeline. It is a pipeline, right? We're setting you up, training you so you can learn these things, and then you can go straight into this industry, right? So we are creating pipelines, on the university and college and university level, right? So, but then it feels like there's an extra layer within documentary. So, so just as a little tangent is that, for 7 years, I ran the documentary forum at City College of New York. And my whole idea with that was that, because, when my mentor friend and the director of the program, Andrea Weiss, came to me, she was like, well, let's start this thing. I was like, well, why? Firelight's already here. Firelight's literally up the street, like 3 blocks from us. Maisels is 6 blocks from us to the east. I'm like, you have Third World Newsreel. What are we going to contribute? And then when I really started, really thinking about it, I said, but how do we get people to Firelight? How do we get people to Tribeca All Access? There is a gap, and it is a big gap, right? Because on one hand, like, those places only have the capacity to take on 10, 12, 15, and then those are 2 places. There's only, there's really, like, literally like 2 or 3 places that really can do that. There's other places that have sprung up, but 10 years ago there were 2, right? And so then I started thinking, what is it, where is that gap, and where do people languish in that gap? And the gap is, what I saw is that once you finish as on the undergraduate or the graduate level, now that you're not paying somebody to coach you and to mush you to like have you make the film, you are kind of out there lost, trying to figure out how to work, how to earn a living, and how to continue to make films. You know, even if you're working in the industry, you're usually not making your own film. You know, honestly, I haven't known anyone who has been able to come out and just start making their own films and make a living at that without having a partner, you know, who can assist, right? So that's where I started seeing the gap, is that like, how can I get people not motivated, because people are motivated, but really support them to a point where they can then move on to, you know, Firelight, Tribeca, now Sundance has their thing, New Orleans, or Southern Doc Fund, North Point, you know, like all those, you know, those places, Cartenquin, those places that are available now for people. So I definitely saw that, you know, also there's this second layer of a pipeline that has to get created. And then also I'm seeing is that, hey, there's actually not enough entities to help everybody. So then what is going to happen then? What are your thoughts on that?
Boy, that's big. Yeah, you know, and I think maybe I'm just brainstorming with you now because I don't have answers. Okay.
That's good.
But yeah, you know, like I did BAVAC before Firelight, which was really helpful to get that leg up. And maybe there could be more of these regional programs that can be that kind of in between. I think that happens. I know a lot with BAVAC ends up being almost a little bit of a pipeline for some of the other, but of course not everyone, you know, it's like maybe one a year out of this program. Right. You know, I think a big thing, right, and then there's all the networking, like Brown Girls Doc Mafia, what's so important is it's supportive before COVID of going to festivals, because a lot of the networking happens there, and this is an industry, honestly, it's not, you need to make great work and put, you know, it feels so, you know, I know there's going to be students probably listening to this and don't want to be discouraging. So there's the art form or your voice, and that you really need to just keep your heart there. But there is this other element of networking and being a part, you know,
I beat my students, not physically, but if I'm at an event that I told them about, I am texting them. I'm like, where are you? We are here. This person is here from LA or from New York. They're here to meet you, and you are not here. You better be here in 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Yeah. Click. You know, I've been sitting, I'm like, listen, it is about, it's also about people. And that's why with the documentary forum, I was very insistent. I'm like, you're going to come show your movie and you're going to be here in person. Can I do a Skype? No Skypes. Let me know when you're going to be in New York City, you know, because those people have to meet you. They have to see you in the flesh and know that this is real, that this is possible, and be able to ask you whatever questions, you know, towards the end, we started recording just to be able to document, but for the first 3 or 4 years, we didn't record the Q&A. So people really had the opportunity, the filmmakers really had the opportunity to be very candid. They're like, you know, that person was a little bit of a whoopee to deal with, you know, that sort of thing. So I'm sorry to cut you off, but I was just thinking, like, it is so important to because, you know, even my white friends who are filmmakers, you know, there's definitely people that were like, wow, they got to make another film. And that's just really because the EP or the distributor of that place loves their work, even though we're like, what is it? I don't get it. Like, literally, there was one guy, I was like, he has made another film. That's incredible. That is incredible. He's a terrible filmmaker. Okay, maybe he's not terrible. You know what? He's not terrible. But I'm like, he should not be getting to make this many films, at that price point. I'm like, that's just not even who he is. And probably he just feels like, I'm so fortunate. I tripped and fell onto the right person who just loves everything I do. And then, in many ways that becomes like a kind of patron situation, like,
oh yeah,
how can we all have patrons? People who just like,
I want a patron.
well, right, who's just going to pay for whatever I make? I love it.
I would love it. I mean, look, one of my idols, is Zora Neale Hurston, and she was a trained anthropologist, became one of the most important novelists in America, right? She also was a filmmaker. A lot of people don't know that.
Yes.
And,
I know all of that.
Yeah, and she had a patron. Although she died very poor, and she was, I think, cleaning homes then, which is unreal to me.
Yeah.
Because this is like to me, she's just like a genius. But yeah, I've always wanted that. I don't have that now. But like, yeah, patron, great. So that is a model. And yeah, but you do, I mean, getting back to networking, it's important. Like, there is a business side of it, and probably anything in life, but definitely in the film world, it's like, but what makes it difficult, a barrier, and that's why, more places like Brown Girls Doc Mafia need to exist, that you can actually, even just supporting people to go to festivals. One of my biggest fears right now, and I know it's different with COVID, and I don't know what to say about it because I'm learning and trying to figure it out. Like, I don't totally know. Like, that's part of my anxiety. I'm submitting to festivals right now, and I'm trying to figure it out. Like, I actually need to figure this out. So it'll be its own adventure. But, one of the things I'm nervous about is, where are the funds that support people to go to festivals, once you finish your film? Because that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's what we're getting back to the marketing and whatever, right? And I think EPs hopefully come in at that point, or but that's a big one. So it's like any of those kinds of support so that people can actually get in the room, because it's I think also an industry of trust. Like, so if you get vetted by, let's say, a Firelight or one of these other organizations, then it's easier for you to get more jobs, for example, because you're vetted and said, okay, this person will, you give them this money and they're gonna deliver, right? Because there's an aspect of that that's understandable, right?
Sure.
And so I don't know, like in college, yeah, like that's why I'm also for like free education and excusing people's loans, because we want, then people are like, well, I got to be a lawyer or doctor because to pay this back off, right? And we, film, humanities, all these things are so important, and getting a college education is like key. It is a gateway. Sure. It's a gateway.
No, absolutely. And the thing of it is that I do, at Spelman, I have a lot of students who will take my class freshman year, and I'm like, so I noticed you're not a major. And they're like, yeah, my parents are both attorneys, and they said, we're not going to pay for that. And I said, so wait a minute. Is it that you want to do it and, they're not going to pay for that, or you're just kind of like, I'm okay without it? And one young lady was really like, I want to do this. And I said, okay, so first of all, you need to become educated on like what this industry is and how it works. I said, so first of all, yes, we are under the arts and culture, but every industry uses video now. You can find a job at Home Depot, at your parents, at wherever law place they work at, universities. I'm like, we have a whole film department, video media department here at this school, and we only have 2,000 students, and there's a department. I mean, it's like 4 people, but can you imagine if you're at like UGA where there's 50,000 students? I just made that up. I don't know how many students there are, but I would assume that there's like 10, a lot of independent filmmakers work at universities, not as lecturers, not as professors, but actually working in the media department, that sort of thing. And I'm like, oh, there's this whole thing called news. you know, you could
Yeah.
work there, so also helping them to understand that there's many places to go where
Absolutely.
you can earn a living. So like, don't let that be a deterrent. Don't let that money be a deterrent. Like, go for what it is that you really want to do. One thing then I'm thinking about, then what is success? What should we be thinking about is success? Because, it seems like we're comparing ourselves and our lives, to a standard that has been created not by us, but ahead of us. So then like, where do we stand on like what is success? I remember this was many years ago, and he has changed his tune, right? But I remember Stanley Nelson was just like, I am happy to have my films on PBS. I get, the maximum number, like diversity and eyeballs on my films through the PBS system. I am not interested in theatrical. All of that has changed because like the mechanisms and how you can get your film out, documentaries specifically, out in theatrical has totally changed, right? So he has had several films go theatrical at this point. But that was initially the thing. Like, my success would be the widest number of people being able to see my film, and for him at that time, and for all of us at that time, was PBS. So then, like, how can we be thinking about success?
I mean, honestly, it's like, I think that's a really good question. Each person has to kind of answer that for themselves.
So what is it for you?
Yeah, for me, I think, if I'm honest with you, it's a combination.
Okay.
Yes, I want the maximum amount of eyeballs on the film. I want to change the world as much as I can, and I think we do that collectively with many films on different topics. For me, like, it's been really important to have community, and not to feel alone. That's a form of success that I've been really proud of, to be honest. Like, being really active in these different groups, whether it's Brown Girls Doc Mafia, whether it's independent directors, whether it's in these fellowships, being a really active member and creating that networks of support. That's success for me. Another way I define success is the actual process in making the film. Like, for me, I never want to do any harm, especially with anybody that's involved in my production. And so that is huge. That's my huge value. So like, like Ashley's a co-writer on the film. She's paid, which I know is controversial, or used to be. I want everybody to thrive. I want to thrive for myself, but I want Ashley to thrive. I want her mom to thrive. I want that, and there's different films, right? There's some films that are expose films, and hey, like, no, whatever, right? But there's different kinds of films, and there's different kinds of relationships that become appropriate. So it depends what film you're making. But so for me, in my filmmaking, that's really important, that we're all uplifted. Another value is that the people involved in the filmmaking, because it's a collaboration, and I love the collaborative aspect to the filmmaking, but I want to have a diverse team. I want to have women. I can work with men and women, but I do love working with teams that are predominantly women. And it's something I had to learn, and it's been my own healing for me.
Talk a little bit about that. What do you mean your own healing for you?
Well, I had done work, so I wasn't really in the industry before I was an academic, and all my work really had to do with war, and I was really surrounded with men. And I chose that, and partly because as a feminist, I felt, I wanted to look at masculinity. I felt like we're never going to change things until we understand, like, and if men also understand, or if we, as a society, understand how masculinity is actually oppressive to all of us, to men included, that we're creating our own traps, There's many things that I dealt with that maybe that's a whole other conversation. And, whether it's people threatening your own safety or sexual aggression and things like that, right? That happen in different work settings, and including the film industry. And so I had made a decision for myself, the next thing I do, and I was transitioning out of academia to trying to do this industry thing. And like I said, I came a little late to it.
You're right on time.
As far as, oh yes,
you're not late.
I'm not late to the party. I'm right on time.
You're right on time.
I'm right on time.
You know how we people of color do? What? We're not late. We're right on time. The party.
We're right on time.
So we got here.
And I wanted to have a predominantly women of color team. That was really important to me. Yes. And so that's success that I was able to pull that off, because I was even told by someone that was a little silly that I thought I could do that. And I did it. So
thank you so very much. This has been really robust. I have a lot of notes. Please tell the audience what they can look forward to, you, or how they can follow you. Like, get some fans up in here, some IG, followers. How do they follow you? How do they know what's happening with Fruits of Labor and whatnot?
So you can look at my website at www.fruitsoflaborfilm.com. You can also follow me at Reversa F. That's my IG handle. I'm so bad at social media. And then we have a Facebook page called Ashley's Story, because that was sort of the working title for a long time. But it's at Fruits of Labor Film, but Ashley's Story. So you can follow us on Facebook as well. Twitter is at Reversa F, I believe, as well. I could maybe send those to you. But anyway, on the webpage, you can sign up for our newsletter. And you'll get email blasts.
Terrific, terrific, terrific. So just really, as I close out, I want to give a shout out to Firelight Media, Seed and Spark, Third World Newsreel, Brown Girls Mafia, all of whom have regularly been having these kind of similar conversations. And I recently found out that the Ford Foundation has commissioned all different kinds of artists, documentarists, journalists to write about the future that they want to see. So if you want to see, other people who are doing these same kind of conversations and getting different perspectives, those are places to go. And with always, my wonderful, talented, super brilliant friend, Emily, thank you so very much for being on part of this. And we will be looking to hear more from you as we've just begun.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, Anjanette, and I appreciate you, love you, and just really happy that we could do this. So thank you for inviting me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for joining in and listening, and I hope you got something out of it for yourself. I invite you to tune in to the next episode. And as always, dream bigger for our future forward.